What if everything people assumed about your life, your wealth, your title, your clean-cut image, was built on top of wounds you've spent decades hiding? What if the man they praise today was once just a trembling boy praying for the shouting to stop? My name is Kevin Morgan. I'm 36, the president of Novamed Technologies, a billion-dollar medical innovation firm based in Austin, Texas. From the outside, my life looks polished corner office, glass walls, a skyline view that stretches past the Colorado River, but none of this came easy. Behind the prestige is a history I rarely speak of, one marked by silent screams, cold stares, and the kind of emotional bruises that never fade. It started in a house people admired. I grew up in a coastal mansion in Santa Barbara, sunlit courtyards, fountains humming outside my bedroom window, everything trimmed to perfection. But behind those wrought iron gates, the air was heavy. My father, Richard Morgan, had founded Novamed long before I could even pronounce it. To the world, he was a visionary. To me, he was the reason I learned how to hide bruises beneath sweaters. In 70-degree weather, I was 6 the night it became clear I was just a shadow in his world. I was curled on the staircase landing, knees tucked to my chest, staring at the gold flecks of the chandelier light. I heard his voice before I saw his face, slurred, cruel, sharp. "You little mistake, you're not mine." The room spun. I didn't even understand what he meant, but the way he pointed, like I was filth, burned itself into me. My mum, Linda, rushed in. She always did. She held me tightly and whispered, "Don't listen to him, sweetheart. You're my whole heart." Her voice steadied me, but it couldn't erase the sting. Those words, his words, followed me like shadows, long after the bruises healed. My mum was my anchor. A quiet force. She had chestnut hair and a laugh that made you forget bad things existed. Every night, when he passed out with a bottle still warm in his hand, she'd sneak into my room, sit at the edge of my bed, and stroke my hair like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Kev," she'd whisper, "you're stronger than he'll ever be. Someday, you'll change lives." Those nights were my escape. I didn't know if I believed her, but I needed to. Then there was Jake, my younger brother, 4 years younger, and light years ahead in my father's eyes. He had the same ice blue eyes as Dad, same smirk, same ease in any room you ever feel. Invisible in your own home? Like you're just noise in someone else's movie? That's how I felt every time Dad clapped Jake on the back after a school play or baseball game. He looked at me like I didn't earn the air I breathed. Jake was the golden sun. I was the quiet one, the shadow. And I never understood why. But here's where I want your thoughts. Have you ever been told, maybe even by someone who's supposed to love you, that you were a mistake? If so, how did you move forward? I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. Someone else might need to hear it too. Because the truth is, every success I have now is built on proving that one cruel sentence wrong. And I know I'm not alone in that. Let me know if this part of the story resonates. I'll keep sharing if you'll keep listening. That question haunted me long before I even had the words to ask it. Growing up in Cedar Ridge, a small town tucked away in Oregon, I lived in the shadow of my younger brother, Caleb. He wasn't just the golden child, he was the sun in my father's sky. And I was just something that lived in the cold. Dad spoiled Caleb with drones, overseas vacations, and basketball camps. I got told to focus on your grades and stop being so weird. I wasn't exactly jealous. Not entirely. But I used to stare at my dad during dinner, silently begging him to look at me the way he looked at Caleb, like he actually saw me. Caleb was wild, cocky, and cruel in that way only children who've never heard no can be. He called me a freak for spending too much time in the library, laughed when I tripped over my own bike chain, and once ripped up my favorite novel just to prove a point. "Think you're better than me or something?" he sneered, clutching the shredded pages. I didn't answer. I just turned away so he wouldn't see the tears gathering in my eyes. Mum tried to balance it out, bless her. But we both knew the truth. Caleb had Dad's protection, and that shield made him bolder, meaner. The worst part, the beatings. They didn't come often, but when they did, they tore through me like lightning quick, brutal, unforgettable. Once, during one of Dad's business gatherings at home, I knocked over a fancy glass vase. The crash silenced the room. He yanked me into his office, slammed the door behind us, and hissed through his teeth, "You humiliated me in front of clients. Who the hell do you think you are?" Then came the slap. I hit the hardwood floor. My cheek stung, but the real wound was in his eyes, pure disgust. Like I wasn't his son, just a nuisance he couldn't throw away. Mum burst in moments later. Sobbing, trying to pull him off me, he shoved her aside like a coat rack and kept shouting. That night, she held me close until I fell asleep, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Mason. I should have protected you." I started to wonder what I'd done to deserve his hate. Why did he sometimes call me the mistake or the stray? Those questions sat heavy in my gut, slowly eating away at my confidence. Maybe I really didn't belong. Maybe I was just ... less. But Mum wouldn't let me drown in that thinking. She poured strength into me, drop by drop. "You don't need to be like anyone else," she'd say. "You've got your own light, chase it." So I chased it in books, in grades, in secret dreams I didn't dare speak aloud. School became my safe space. I devoured science textbooks, wrote essays like they were lifelines. I kept earning top marks. But even my perfect report cards couldn't thaw my father's glare. "What's all that stuff gonna get you?" he grumbled one night, barely looking up from his dinner plate. "Caleb's the one taking over the business. You're just academic noise." Those words should have crushed me. Instead, they ignited something. I wasn't trying to take Caleb's place, I just wanted to prove I mattered. I wanted Mum to see her sacrifices weren't in vain. Then came Caleb's 10th birthday. The disaster. We'd rented out a big lodge. Dad had invited half his corporate contacts. The place was dripping in decorations and ice sculptures, and Caleb, he lost it. Threw an entire slice of cake into the face of some high-ranking investor. Frosting everywhere. Laughter died. The room fell into shocked silence. I held my breath, expecting Dad to finally lose it on Caleb. But no, he looked at me. Fury in his eyes. "Couldn't you have stopped him?" he barked. "Do something useful for once." I hadn't even moved. My brother humiliated him, and yet somehow, I was still the one to blame. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your own story? If you've lived that quiet kind of pain, the kind no one claps for, no one posts about, tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Because sometimes, the ones who stay silent are the ones carrying the heaviest load. Have you ever been blamed for something so unfair, so gut-wrenching, that it left a permanent mark on your soul? I have, and I still remember the exact moment it happened. Every sound, every face in that room. It happened in the middle of our living room. In front of everyone, family, neighbors, even a few co-workers of my dad's. He turned to me, eyes blazing, and shouted, "Why didn't you keep an eye on him?" Then came the slap. Hard, sudden. My cheek stung and flushed red hot. But what hurt more was the humiliation. I stood there frozen, my chest tight, tears threatening, but I didn't cry. Not because I was brave. No, I had just learned how to make myself disappear. My mum rushed over and pulled me into her arms. She didn't say much, just held me close and whispered, "You won't have to endure this forever. One day, you'll get out of here." It wasn't a rescue, but it was a lifeline. A small, whispered hope that maybe, just maybe, I could one day breathe freely without fear. I clung to that promise like it was oxygen. I began to imagine a life beyond that house, a life where I didn't flinch when someone raised their voice, a life where I could exist without shame. But I didn't know that soon, life would take away the only person who ever saw me, the only light I had. Let me know in the comments, have you ever held on to someone's words just to survive? By the time I turned 15, I'd stopped chasing anything from my dad. No more reaching for affection. No more pretending Ryan, my half-brother, would treat me like family. The truth was brutal, but at least it was clear. Instead, I threw myself into school. Books became my escape. Math problems and history essays were my armor. Every A I earned, every nod from a teacher, felt like a brick in a wall between me and my father's cruelty. I wasn't just trying to get into college, I was trying to prove to myself that I wasn't the useless nobody he said I was. My high school in Santa Monica was no sanctuary, though. It was the kind of place where kids wore designer shoes to gym class and bragged about ski trips in Aspen. I had nothing to offer them. No fancy vacations. No family legacy. Just second-hand textbooks and silent ambition. But being alone taught me something no classroom ever could. I learned how to rely on myself, how to keep moving, even when it hurt. I turned my loneliness into fuel. Can you relate? If you've ever felt like the odd one out, drop a below. You're not alone. The only person who ever showed up for me was my mum. She'd come to every award ceremony, dressed modestly but proud. My father never once came, not even when I won the school-wide academic excellence medal. But my mum, she stood right in front of the auditorium that day, clapping like I'd won the Nobel Prize. I can still see her face beaming, eyes glossy. That moment stayed with me. Because it wasn't about the award, it was about being seen, and looking. Back now, I realize, the seeds of my strength weren't planted in comfort or love. They were planted in pain, in silence, in rejection and watered by my mum's quiet, unwavering belief in me. If you've ever had one person believe in you, when no one else did tell me who they were, I'd love to read your story. What gives someone the strength to defy the people who doubt them the most? Sometimes, it takes just one voice. One unwavering believer to drown out the noise of disbelief. For me, that voice was my mum. After my high school graduation ceremony, my mother stood up in the crowd, clapping, as if I had just won an Olympic medal. Her eyes shimmered with pride. Later, she took me to this little ice cream place near the pier in Ventura. We sat on the faded wooden bench, seagulls overhead, and she squeezed my hand with all her might. "I'm so proud of you, Kevin," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you you're not enough." That moment, simple as it was, stayed with me like a heartbeat. Moments like that were rare but powerful. Like medicine for the soul. When I turned 17, I filled out an application to Harvard. I remember barely being able to click submit. It was my dream, but also a risk. A long shot. My dad laughed when he found out. "Harvard you," he scoffed, then rolled his eyes. "Don't embarrass yourself, kid." My older brother, Jake, who had already learned to laugh at everything, smirked and said, "If you get into Harvard, I'll walk barefoot to the moon." But my mum, she rolled up her sleeves. She read every line of my essays, helped edit them, word by word. "You've earned this, Kevin," she told me, her voice calm and certain. "You're going to make it." The day the envelope arrived, I just sat there frozen in my room. My hands shook. My chest felt like it might burst. When I finally opened it and read those words, "Congratulations, Kevin Meyer," I couldn't stop the tears. I didn't cry out of joy. I cried because, for once, I felt like I mattered. I ran downstairs, holding the letter like it was the Holy Grail. My mum pulled me into the tightest hug. Her face was wet with tears. "I knew it," she whispered into my ear. "I knew you would." My dad didn't even look up from his paper. He muttered something about tuition and left the room. "Jake." He gave a lazy thumbs up and didn't say a word. But I didn't care. Harvard wasn't just a college, it was my way out. When I left Ventura that fall, stepping into the red and gold canopy of Cambridge, Massachusetts, I felt like I had entered another universe. I chose to major in business not just because it matched my dream of building something someday, but because I wanted to understand how companies worked. I wanted to take control of my own future. I wanted to become more than the boy my father never saw. At Harvard, I was like a fish, finally finding the right stream. I worked non-stop, studied like my life depended on it, took up shifts at the campus library just to keep from touching the allowance my dad grudgingly sent always with a passive-aggressive message about how I owed him everything. I used that resentment as fuel. Every dollar I earned on my own tasted sweeter, and when I finally earned a full academic scholarship, It felt like real freedom. Still, his voice haunted me. Every phone call ended with a jab. "What's that overpriced school teaching you, huh?" Jake didn't call at all, but my mum, she sent letters. Beautiful, handwritten letters every month. She'd write about how the hydrangeas were blooming, or how she found an old photo of us building a sandcastle. I saved every single one, kept them in a wooden box under my bed. I'd reread them when midterms crushed me, or when the loneliness crept in. In one letter, she wrote, "You are my hope. Kevin, no matter how hard life gets, remember I'm always here." Let me pause here, because I want to ask you, who's been your anchor? Who believed in you when no one else did? Drop their name in the comments. Let's honor them together. Those letters weren't just words, they were lifelines. In a world that kept trying to tell me I wasn't enough, they reminded me that one person, one heart, could make all the difference. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to carry me forward. If you're still reading, thank you. I hope my story reminds you that even when the world doubts you, a single voice can be the one thing that saves you. Want to share what kept you going? I'd love to hear it. Have you ever had one single moment split your life into a before and an after, like a clean, merciless break? Mine came when I was 20. It was early April, still bitter cold in Boston. I was tucked away in the back corner of the law library at Emerson University, cramming for midterms, half asleep, and surrounded by textbooks. Then my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I normally let those go to voicemail, but for some reason that day, I picked up. "Jason." A woman's voice, soft but shaky. "I'm a friend of your mother's. I don't know how to tell you this." My heart just froze. I couldn't breathe. She told me my mum, Diane, had been in a plane crash. A private jet headed from Santa Barbara to Boston meant, to surprise me, had gone down minutes after takeoff. Engine failure. There were no survivors. The phone slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. My legs followed. I don't remember leaving the library. I just remember the sound of my own breath, and the way my chest ached like something had physically cracked inside me. My mother, the only person who ever believed in me, was gone. Just like that. I never got to say goodbye. Never got to tell her how much I loved her. All I had left were her handwritten letters, the scent of her perfume on old envelopes, and a hollow space inside me that nothing has ever been able to fill. That night, I flew home to Santa Barbara. In a daze I walked into the house, hoping for comfort. But instead, I found my dad, Warren, sitting alone in the living room with a glass of whiskey. His eyes were bloodshot. My older brother, Dean, stood off to the side with his arms crossed, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. No one hugged me. No one even asked how I was holding up. My dad just looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you hadn't asked her to visit, she'd still be alive." Those words, they shattered me more than the crash ever could have. I wanted to scream, to break something, but all I did was stand there, silent, broken. The funeral was exactly what I feared: extravagant, polished, empty. My dad turned it into a show, flashing smiles for executives, shaking hands with investors. Dean came in wearing an overpriced suit, whispered something fake about how sorry he was, and left before the casket was even closed. Stayed alone. Just me and the photo of my mother, smiling, her warmth still echoing in my memory. I clutched that memory like a lifeline. After that day, something in me shifted. By my relationship with my dad shattered. We barely spoke, and Dean, he acted like none of it happened. Like we hadn't just lost the person who held us all together. And the worst part, I started to believe maybe my dad was right. Maybe if I hadn't asked her to come, maybe she'd still be alive. But I couldn't let that be the end of her story, or mine. I returned to Emerson with nothing but grief and determination. I buried myself in books, in long nights at the library, in internships and research grants. I poured every ounce of pain into work. If I couldn't fix the past, I'd at least build something my mom would have been proud of. Graduating summa cum laude wasn't enough. I stayed on for my master's. I stopped calling home. No texts, no holidays, No more pretending that the only thing I kept. A small wooden box, tucked under my bed, filled with her letters. I read one every night before I slept. My favorite one always ended with the same words, "You're stronger than you think." Sometimes, I whispered that out loud, just to keep from falling apart. Over time, I built real connections. Professors, mentors, friends, who saw me, not just my grades. One of them was Jonathan Blake, the father of a classmate. A sharp, seasoned investor with an eye for people who don't quit. He noticed me early on, said he liked the way I handled pressure. I didn't tell him that pressure was the only thing keeping me upright. By the time I finished my master's, I had one clear goal: build a legacy she would have believed in. And I had the firepower to make it happen. Have you ever walked across a graduation stage and felt completely alone? That was me. The room was full of people clapping, celebrating, hugging their families. But my father didn't call. My half-brother, Zach, didn't care. And the only person who would have cried tears of joy for me, my mum, had been gone for years. I stood on that stage at Columbia, fake smiling for the cameras, holding a diploma that was supposed to mean something, but inside, I just felt hollow. That moment didn't feel like an ending or a beginning. It felt like a dare, because deep down, I knew what was coming. I'd be heading back to where it all started, back to Silverline Medical Systems. Back to confront the people who left me behind. Only this time, I wasn't that nervous, awkward kid. I was a grown man, and I was ready. When I landed in San Diego, it was one of those dry, brutal California days, where the heat sticks to your skin, but honestly, the sunburn didn't matter. The burn inside me was way worse. That fire had been growing since I was a boy, since they called me names in my father's office, since Zach smirked while I sat alone, since my dad pretended I didn't exist. Tucked in my suitcase was a master's degree from Harvard. You'd think it'd feel like a trophy, right? Like I'd finally made it. Nope. It just felt like armor, something I'd need when I stepped into that corporate battlefield. Because Silverline wasn't just a medical tech company anymore. It was a war zone, and I wasn't walking in to make peace. Weeks before that flight, while I was packing up my tiny apartment in Cambridge, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I knew who it was before I even picked up. "Come back," my dad said. No hello, no congratulations, just 2 words, cold, and clipped like he was ordering a shipment. The company's short on people. Don't think that Harvard thing gets you any favors. I stood there, hand gripping the phone, jaw locked. Every muscle in my body wanted to say, "Go to hell." But then I remembered my mum. Her voice, soft but steady, echoed in my mind. "You're stronger than you think." If I turned my back now, he'd win. He'd get to keep believing I wasn't good enough, that I didn't matter, and I wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. So I said, "Yes, if this were your story, what would you have done in my shoes? Walked away? Or walked into the fire?" When I arrived at Silverline Medical, the place was unrecognizable. The building shimmered with glass and steel, like some tech giant straight out of Silicon Valley. Their logo was etched in chrome, catching the sunlight like a crown, but I didn't care how shiny it looked. I knew what was underneath. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting outside my dad's office, clutching a comic book while he barked orders behind a door I was never allowed to open. Back then, Silverline was small, just a few rooms, a few employees, but now it was huge. Their imaging systems were used in hospitals across the country. Their surgical devices were becoming the new standard. But success on paper didn't mean health inside. I could smell the rot. My father, Richard Hale, was still in charge, but his decisions were slipping. And Zach, who'd somehow been handed a VP title, spent more time golfing than working. The company was bloated, slow, and bleeding talent, and I was supposed to help save it. On my first morning, I barely had time to breathe before I was called upstairs. My father's office looked like a boardroom in a power movie. Everything mahogany, heavy, dark. Just like him, he didn't smile, didn't offer a seat. He just stared. Then said, "Don't waste my time." That was our first real conversation in 5 years. Want to know what I wanted to say to him right then? I'll be honesty, imagined a dozen versions. Most of them ended with me flipping his desk. But instead, I said nothing, because this wasn't about talking. It was about proving. And this time, I'd let my actions do the talking. Now, your turn. Tell me this. Have you ever walked back into the place that broke you, just to prove you could stand tall? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear your story. Have you ever walked into a place knowing they'd already decided who you were going to be? Not based on your talent, not your work, just your last name. That was me, walking into Lakeview Biotech, where my dad Gregory Thomas had been CEO for over 2 decades, and standing beside him that morning was Brandon, my younger half-brother. 22, flashy blue suit, Rolex he didn't pay for. Same smug face I remembered from every family holiday I'd come home for and regretted. You'll start in clinical analytics. My dad said, barely glancing at me. Entry level, don't expect any special treatment. I nodded, keeping my mouth shut. I'd been through worse. But I couldn't ignore what I saw. Brandon, who barely scraped through community college, was just announced as Director of Brand Strategy. Director, at 22. He gave me a sideways look, his lips twisting into that same mock smile I'd seen 1,000 times. Welcome to the bottom floor, big bro, he said, his voice pure venom disguised as a joke. Let me tell you something, those first weeks were brutal. My desk was squeezed into a back corner of the analytics wing, wedged between a filing cabinet and a water cooler that never worked. Everyone around me, data scientists, clinical testers, software developers, kept their distance. Not out of rudeness, they were just wary. I was the CEO's son, sure, but I wasn't his favorite, and they all knew that. Wait, you're Mason, right? A woman named Denise asked me on day 2. She was a senior algorithm engineer with sharp eyes and coffee breath. Didn't you go to MIT? What are you doing stuck back here? I laughed politely, but I didn't answer. How could I explain that? I wasn't here because I wanted power, I was here because I needed to remember who I was, without him. My job wasn't glamorous. I reviewed sensor performance data from remote health monitors, flagged anomalies, and helped translate clinical feedback into viable design tweaks. No spotlight, no applause, but I loved it. Every number told a story. Every glitch I helped fix might mean someone out there getting one more healthy day. Most nights, I stayed long after the last employee left, not because I wanted a gold star, but because, for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something real. For me, my dad never noticed. In meetings, he zeroed in on Brandon, who pitched absurd campaigns like hologram billboards in Times Square without a shred of market data. And still, my father would say, now that's vision. When I raised a proposal to optimize real-time heart rate monitoring for pediatric devices, he waved it off with a grunt. Mason, just do your part. Let the creatives handle the big picture. Stuff used to hurt, doesn't anymore. Now, I just breathe through it. But every time Brandon tossed out a buzzword salad and got praised for it, yeah, I won't lie, that fire in my chest lit a little hotter, so I shifted focus. I stopped trying to earn my dad's approval and started earning trust from the people who actually made things work. Lunches in the break room with the QA team, collaborating after hours with junior developers. I asked questions, took notes, shared credit. Bit by bit, I became part of their world. And Denise, the same one who'd asked why I was in the basement, she became my ally. She opened doors I didn't even know existed, shared internal reports, contract issues, and most importantly, truth. Your brother's bleeding money on that influencer garbage, she said one day, flipping her screen toward me. This company doesn't need another showboat, Mason. It needs a builder. Her words hit hard. Not just because they were true, but because they echoed something I hadn't let myself believe in a long time. Maybe I still mattered now. Pause for a second. If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, told to sit down while someone else fumbled your dream, I know this feeling below. I'm curious how many of us were told to dim our light so someone else could shine. Anyway, back to the story. What happened next changed everything. Have you ever looked someone in the eyes, someone who's supposed to be your family, and realized they would burn everything down just to watch you fail? That moment hit me in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, standing outside the conference room at Preston Dynamics, the company my mother once dreamed would change lives. I was clutching a folder full of budget reports, already exhausted from a long day, and then I heard Derek's voice, my half-brother, through the barely cracked door, bragging to a marketing assistant like the place was already his. "This company's mine," he said with that smug, hollow tone he always used when he was performing. "Dad promised. Logan's just the help." I froze, my fingers tightened around the folder until the plastic edges dug into my skin. Just the help. I'd built entire product lines from scratch. I'd pulled us back from the brink of bankruptcy. But none of that mattered, not to Derek, and certainly not to my father. I wanted to burst through the door and call him out, but I didn't. I swallowed it. Because I knew the truth: if Derek took over Preston Dynamics, everything would fall apart. And unlike him, I wasn't in this for ego or applause. I was in this to honor the one person who ever believed in me, my mother. Back at my desk, I couldn't focus. My father had always treated me like a second-class citizen in both his life and his company. Even though I had a master's in biomedical engineering and my initiatives had saved us millions, he dismissed me like a nuisance. I'll never forget the day I presented a prototype for a modular diagnostic tablet. Midway through the pitch, he waved his hand and said, "Stop wasting our time with fantasies. Just stick to your lane." His words stung. But what gutted me more was the look in his eyes, disdainful, detached, like I didn't even belong. That same look he gave me as a kid when he used to remind me I wasn't his real son. But this time, I didn't flinch. Because I knew I was no longer that kid. I was a man with a purpose and a plan. A week later, I was working late, elbows deep in project specs, when Natalie, a lead compliance officer, and one of the few people I trusted, knocked and slipped into my office. Her brow was tight with worry. "Logan," she said quietly, "I need to show you something." She pulled out a flash drive and loaded the documents. Contracts. Email threads. My heart started pounding. Turns out, Derek had talked my father into signing a massive supply deal with a sketchy vendor just so Derek could pocket a 7-figure kickback. If the supplier defaulted, the entire company would be on the hook for tens of millions. I stared at the numbers. My stomach turned. This wasn't just nepotism or bad management. This was sabotage. And it wasn't about family drama anymore. This was about Preston Dynamics. About the people who worked here. About the dream my mother once had for this place. So I didn't scream. I didn't confront Derek or my father, not yet. I started gathering evidence. Quietly, carefully. Over the next few weeks, I pulled contracts, tracked internal memos, built timelines of bad decisions and unethical deals. I was relentless. By day, I was the obedient engineer. By night, I was laying the groundwork to save the company from the inside. I started meeting with people who cared. Natalie, Carl from R&D, even some folks in operations who were fed up with Derek's chaos. We weren't loud, we weren't flashy, but we were building something. A quiet alliance, rooted in merit, loyalty, and truth. One night, long after everyone had left, I sat alone in my office overlooking downtown Denver. I opened the drawer and pulled out a wooden box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the letters my mother had written me before she passed, words I hadn't read since college. One of them simply said, "You are my hope. You are not a mistake." I sat there in the dark, letter trembling in my hands, and decided I wouldn't just survive this, I would win. Not for recognition, not for revenge, but because my mother deserved to see her son become everything they told him he'd never be. From that point on, I worked with a new fire. I began looking into the company's ownership structure, stock distribution, board voting rights, employee equity. I didn't just want to expose Derek, I wanted to ensure he could never touch this place again. But what would you do in my shoes? If your own family treated you like a pawn would, you fight. or walk away? Let me know in the comments. What would justice look like for you? What if one phone call had the power to unravel everything you believed about your family, your identity, your entire life? I always thought that if I worked hard enough, eventually, the old man would see me. Not just see me, respect me, but every time I spoke up, it was like yelling into a storm. My father, Charles Donovan, ran our medical diagnostics company like a king ruling a crumbling castle. And Ryan, my half-brother, was the favored prince. He burned through budgets like gasoline on dry wood, launching flashy ad campaigns that failed spectacularly, yet Dad always had his back. Always. One day, during a particularly tense board meeting, I couldn't stay silent anymore. If we keep hemorrhaging money like this, I said, we're going to lose our partners. Dad's eyes flared with disdain. What do you think you know about business, Jacob? Ryan chuckled. That smirk-lazy, cruel felt like a slapdot. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized effort wasn't enough. I needed leverage, real power. The kind Dad and Ryan held through manipulation, legacy, and secrets. So I stopped trying to prove myself and started planning strategically, quietly. I documented every weakness in the company, every failed move, every lie. I was waiting for the day I'd need it, but then, something happened I never saw coming. It was a cold, drizzling October afternoon in Seattle. Rain clung to the glass of my office window while I reviewed analytics on a new device we were prepping for FDA trials. That's when the call came. A nurse panicked. Mr. Jacob Donovan. Your father, Charles, has been admitted to the ER. He's had a mild heart attack and is severely anemic. We need a blood donor right away. My chest tightened. We hadn't spoken in weeks. Still, no matter the past, I couldn't ignore this. I drove through sheets of rain, stomach churning. When I arrived at the hospital, my father looked smaller. His eyes were shut, his face gray, as if someone had drained the fire out of him. Ryan was there, too, leaning against the wall, scrolling on his phone like he was waiting for a coffee order. No emotion, no urgency, just indifference. The ICU doctor came in, urgent. We need a blood transfusion. Are either of you willing to be tested? I'll do it, I said before Ryan could even look up. He scoffed and muttered, yeah, no. Needles and I don't mix. I went in for testing, sat in silence, thinking about all the years I'd spent chasing a man who never wanted to be caught. An hour later, the doctor returned. His face had changed, calm, but guarded. Jacob, he said, your blood type is B positive. Mr. Donovan's is O genetically. That's incompatible. You can't be his biological son. The words didn't register. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice barely audible. He explained gently, but it didn't matter. The pieces of my identity I'd clung to were suddenly foreign. That name I'd carried, Donovan, didn't belong to me. Not by blood. And Ryan, the smirking heir, he was his real son. In one instant, everything I thought I knew collapsed. Not just about my father, but about me. And here's where I want to ask you, what would you have done? Would you walk away from a legacy that rejected you? Or would you fight back with the truth? Let me know in the comments. This isn't just my story, it's a question that tests anyone who's ever been overlooked or lied to. And trust me, the next move I made changed everything. Have you ever felt your entire life collapse in a single breath? Not in some dramatic movie scene, but in real, heavy, gut-punching silence. That's what happened to me the moment my dad, the man I thought was my dad, glared at me from that hospital bed and spit out the words, "You're not mine, you never were." I swear the ground shifted. My legs didn't give out, but my heart did. His voice kept echoing in my skull, like it had all those nights when I was a kid, when he'd throw insults, fists, or just that cold look, like I was some stray he was forced to bring home. And suddenly, everything made sense. He knew, he'd always known. I wasn't his biological son, but if that was true, who was I? And what about my mum? The woman who loved me with a warmth so fierce it could melt steel. Was she really my mother? Or had everything I believed been a lie? These weren't just questions, they were earthquakes cracking my world open. The hospital walls felt like they were closing in, so I left. No one stopped me, no one asked. It was raining hard, the kind of rain that soaks through to your bones. But I didn't even feel it. I just drove. Back at my apartment in Seattle's North End, I dropped into the kitchen chair like the wind had been knocked out of me. Across the table sat the old wooden box that held my mum's letters, the ones she left me when she passed. I wanted to tear it open, to demand answers, but I couldn't. Not yet, because some small stubborn part of me wasn't ready for the truth. What if those letters crushed the only beautiful thing I still had, my memory of her love? The next day, they released him, Martin Reynolds, the man who raised me. Not a thank you. Not a single word about the blood transfusion I'd agreed to give him, just a grunt and a door slam. But I couldn't let it go. I needed to know. I started digging, silently, methodically. No family calls, no texts. I reached out to an old roommate from college, now a lawyer in Portland. His name's Kevin. Smart guy, discreet. He helped me get legal access to family medical files and old marriage records. Then I hired Paul Mendoza, a former state cop turned private investigator, who now worked from a tiny office behind a barbershop in Capitol Hill. No social media, no questions. Just results. For weeks, I lived two lives by day. I wore my badge and polo at Cascade Health Tech, fixing diagnostic systems and acting like nothing had changed, but at night, I turned into someone else. Someone haunted. Paul sent over thick envelopes and digital PDFs. I read every word, sometimes twice. I pieced together timelines like a detective in a bad thriller. One detail stuck with me like a splinter under the skin. My parents, Martin and Olivia Reynolds, got married just 3 months before I was born. I'd never questioned the timing before, but now, it screamed. Then came the record that broke me. A file from St. Vincent Hospital in San Diego. Dated June 1992. My mum had been admitted for serious injuries from an assault. Internal bleeding. Broken ribs, facial bruising. The words blurred as I read. She never filed a police report, never named who did it, and I was born 8 months later. I stared at the report for hours, hands frozen. Mind numb. Was I the result of that night? Is that why Martin hated me? Because I wasn't a child born of love, but of trauma. Every part of me wanted to reject that idea, to scream no, but piece by piece it fit. His disgust, the way he looked at me like I was some parasite. The way she loved me like I was all she had. I didn't cry for me, I cried for her. My mum, the woman with the soft voice and calloused hands, endured that horror, and still chose to love me with everything she had. She raised me like I was her miracle, not her burden. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at her picture. I whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have known." And I made a decision. It was time to confront the man who tried to bury the truth. The next evening, I drove back to that cold white house in Lakewood, the one with the hedges trimmed like everything had to be perfect. The house I used to fear. He answered the door, and I was ready. Have you ever asked a question you weren't ready to hear the answer to but asked anyway? Because the silence was already too loud to bear. I remember that night clearly. My father sat in the living room, cradling a glass of whiskey like it was his only friend. Same dim lamp. Same silence between us. But Ryan wasn't there. Probably out somewhere drinking champagne he didn't pay for. I stood a few feet away from the man who raised me, my hands clammy, heart racing. I didn't ease into it. I just asked, flat out, "Am I not your biological son?" For a moment, it felt like the air left the room. He didn't flinch, didn't even blink, just stared at me with that hollow look he always gave when he was 2 drinks in and didn't want to deal with reality. After what felt like forever, he muttered, "If you already know, why ask?" Those words didn't land like an answer. They landed like a door slamming shut. But I needed more. Did Mum know? My voice cracked when I said it. I think deep down, I was hoping he'd say no. That maybe she was just as in the dark as me. He didn't say anything right away. Then came a bitter smirk, one I'd seen him give strangers he thought were beneath him. Elizabeth loved you more than anyone, but she never wanted you to know. She said you were hers. That was enough for her. That cut deep. It was like being split in two. Half of me wanted to scream. The other half wanted to run. But there was something strangely freeing in hearing the truth out loud. I wanted more details, dates, names, but he stood up, turned his back, and said coldly, "Don't dig into the past, Matt, it won't change anything." I walked out of his house with my mind on fire. So many puzzle pieces suddenly made sense. He treated Ryan like royalty, and me like a stray dog. Why Mum held me so tightly, even when I didn't understand why. But I also felt lost. I had two choices: walk away and cut every tie to that broken family, or stay and fight. Not just for me, but for her, for the woman who shielded me from a truth she knew would break me. Maybe it was anger, maybe revenge, maybe love. I don't know exactly what made me stay, but I stayed. And that decision, as irrational as it felt in the moment, was the beginning of something much bigger. I went back to work at my father's company Ascent Biosystems as if nothing had changed. On paper, I was still just an operations analyst buried deep in the org chart. Invisible. But that was my edge. No one saw me as a threat. Not my father, and definitely not Ryan. So I listened, learned, watched, while Ryan flaunted his title at rooftop parties. And my father sat in ivory tower meetings pretending to lead. I studied the company from the ground up. I learned the supply chains, the clinical protocols, the partner deals, the under-the-table agreements my father thought no one noticed. I read board minutes like scripture. Memorized the shareholder map like a war general planning a siege. Every overlooked report, every ignored department, every forgotten employee, they were pieces of my puzzle. I wasn't coming for revenge. I was coming for the whole damn company. Have you ever realized that building something great means staying quiet longer than you'd like and trusting the right people at just the right time? That's where I found myself, in the middle of a tech giant's slow collapse. Keeping my head down while quietly stitching together something bigger than anyone could see. I wasn't interested in revenge, I wanted change. And to make it happen, I needed allies who believed in more than just their paycheck. Working in product development for the past year had given me a front row seat to the real heartbeat of the company. And more importantly, it introduced me to the kind of people who could help me reshape it. One of those people was Maria Carter, brilliant, quietly powerful, and one of the few souls left in the building who hadn't yet given up. One rainy Tuesday night, after everyone else had clocked out, I texted her, "Coffee." We met at this tiny cafe, 2 blocks from the office. The kind of place with foggy windows, chipped mugs, and jazz humming low in the background. Under the dim glow of those yellow hanging lights, I finally spoke. "Maria," I said, barely above a whisper, "don't you feel it? Like this whole company's sinking." I looked her in the eye. Garrett's outdated vision, and Ryan's reckless decisions. They're pulling us into the ground. She sighed, setting her cup down gently. "I know," she said. "I've been here a decade, Matt. I remember when we were changing lives with every prototype. Now we're just cleaning up messes." I leaned forward. What if I had a way to fix it? Would you help me? She didn't answer right away. She just watched me, eyes sharp but kind. Then she nodded once. "If you can show me you're serious, not just dreaming, I'll back you." That was it. My first domino. And Maria wasn't just some engineer lost in the back rooms of R&D. She was respected, quietly feared. Even if she leaned my way, others would follow. So, I kept at it quietly, patiently. I started having lunch with the system architects. I walked the warehouse floors with the logistics teams. I remembered names. I listened. Not once did I trash talk Ryan. I didn't need to. People were already exhausted. From the execs to the machine operators, everyone had a story about Ryan's impulsive spending or how Garrett refused to let go of the past. And I let them talk. Every rant, every offhand comment, it all became part of the blueprint I was building. In my head, but I knew I needed more than whispers. I needed someone with real influence. Someone who understood risk and reward at a level beyond the boardroom. That's when I reached out to Charles Bennett. Now, Charles wasn't just anyone. He was a heavyweight investor, the kind who could smell a bluff from 100 miles away. I'd met him back in college. He was the father of my classmate, Drew. We'd had a few conversations back then, but I'd never given him a reason to remember me until now. I flew out to San Francisco, nerves buzzing, and stepped into his glass-paneled office overlooking the bay. The place was crisp, modern, expensive but not flashy. Just like him, Charles stood up with a practiced smile. "Matt," he said, raising an eyebrow, "you're not the kind of guy who flies across the country for a latte. What's going on?" I took a breath, and then I told him everything. I laid it all out: how the company was bleeding talent, how leadership had stopped listening, how Garrett was blind to change, and how Ryan was gambling with lives, not just budgets. But I didn't just complain. I showed him the numbers, the roadmap, the vision. He listened without a word. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're either crazy or brilliant, maybe both." I smiled. "I'll take both if it gets us out of this mess." Now, if you're still reading, here's where I need you. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you trust an old investor? Lean on an engineer like Maria? Or keep pushing solo? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment on your insight. Means more than you know. Have you ever wanted something so badly that you were willing to walk the tightrope between right and wrong just to fix what others had broken? Remember sitting across from Marcus, the one man I knew could shift the balance. We were in his Manhattan office, rain tapping softly against the window. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I need your help, but this stays between us." I laid it all out. The vision I had for Sierra Diagnostics, the potential I saw buried under years of incompetence and nepotism. I spoke about the AI diagnostic tool I'd been quietly developing in my spare time, how it could revolutionize early disease detection in rural hospitals. But none of that could happen unless I had real control. Then I told him plainly, "I need you, Marcus." He leaned back, intrigued. "What do you want me to do?" I explained everything. I asked him to invest but quietly, using a shell company to stay off my father's radar. In return, I'd share early insight into product launches that would spike stock prices. And when the time came, I needed him to vote with me in the boardroom. He drummed his fingers on the desk, his expression unreadable. "You're playing with fire, Nick," he said. "If Robert finds out, it won't end well." "I know," I said. "But if I don't act, this company will crumble under Lucas's leadership. I can't sit back and watch that happen." There was a long pause before he finally nodded. "All right, I'm in, but keep your promises." That was the turning point. With Marcus backing me, I started building a secret portfolio. Every time Sierra Diagnostics prepared for a big launch or signed a crucial partnership, I'd send Marcus a quiet heads up. He bought shares through layers of dummy corporations, and I received a silent cut. It wasn't exactly clean. I knew that. But clean didn't stand a chance against the legacy of control my father and Lucas held. They weren't going to step aside willingly. I had to use every angle I could find. Still, the stakes were dangerously high. Robert, my father, wasn't an idiot. For all his arrogance, he monitored shareholder movements obsessively. If he even sniffed the truth, I'd be out. Not just out - excommunicated, so I walked carefully. I smiled during meetings. I gave updates like a loyal VP, and I kept everything compartmentalized. But there was one meeting I'll never forget. My father stared across the table, then said, "You seem unusually well informed about our stock performance. Why is that?" My pulse thudded in my ears, but I forced a calm tone. "I'm trying to understand the business, sir. If I'm going to lead someday, I need to grasp the full picture." He watched me, his expression unreadable, then nodded slowly. But I could tell, the seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, Lucas, my older brother, was a walking liability. He once signed a $5 million ad contract with a shady firm, purely because the CEO was his drinking buddy. The deal backfired spectacularly, and we lost one of our biggest hospital clients. I documented everything: emails, contracts, budget overruns. I built a quiet arsenal, one mistake at a time, because I knew I'd need undeniable proof when the reckoning came. But there were nights when the mask cracked. Alone in my apartment, I'd sit in the dark with nothing but the hum of the fridge and the echo of my thoughts. Sometimes I'd reread my mum's old letters, the ones she wrote before she passed, full of hope and softness that no longer had a place in our family. She once wrote, "You are my anchor in a stormy sea." I held on to that because some nights I wondered if I'd become like my father, cunning, detached. Was I still fighting for something good, or just trying to prove I was better than the men who made me feel small? 10 years passed like smoke in the wind, a decade of quiet war. But that letter, her words, they reminded me of who I used to be, and why I started this in the first place. Not for revenge, not for power, but for justice. Have you ever spent years building something in silence, just to prove to the people who ignored you that you were always the one holding it all together? I look back now, and honestly, I barely recognize the kid I used to be. The one who shook when he spoke, who sat quietly in meetings and let others take credit for his work. That boy is gone. I'm now 36, heading product development at a company called Novamed Systems. The title still says associate, but behind that label is an entire empire I built in the shadows. Novamed was a sinking ship when I joined. Stale ideas, outdated tech, and leadership stuck in the past. Today, it's worth over $1.2 billion. That transformation didn't come from a family legacy or a golden handshake. It came from relentless days, sleepless nights, and a vision I refused to let die. 5 years ago, I proposed an AI-powered diagnostic tool that could detect early-stage cancer with over 95% accuracy. It got shot down at first by my father, by the board, by every so-called expert in the room. But I didn't stop. I gathered a small team in secret. We worked after hours, fueled by pure belief. That tool, it's now the core product, driving Novamed's global reach. Hospitals from Boston to Berlin to Tokyo are fighting to get their hands on it. And that's just one project. Surgical robotics, real-time remote health systems. If it's at the cutting edge, chances are I had a hand in it. But you won't find my name on any of the company's press releases. My father wouldn't allow it. He still acts like he built this empire, when all he really did was sit on the throne and ignore every warning sign around him. Let me be clear, I didn't do this alone. Maria, my closest friend, our lead engineer, became my anchor. She believed in the vision when no one else did. Her brilliance turned prototypes into miracles. Our team, the real team, followed us, not them. They saw through the charade. They knew who was actually leading. And then there's Caleb, my younger brother. 32, slick hair, tailored suits, and not a single idea worth writing down. He's the director of marketing, if you can believe it. Runs overpriced ad campaigns that tank every quarter, then blames timing or market shifts. My father buys every excuse. Dad's in his 60s now, slower, still clinging to the chairman's seat, like it's a birthright, but he doesn't understand the world anymore. He dismisses AI as a fad, automation as a threat, and innovation as risky. And worst of all, he still thinks Caleb's the future of the company. So I stayed quiet, played the long game. I wasn't going to wrestle the crown from them. I was going to outgrow the entire kingdom. The turning point. Charles Bennett. We met at Stanford back in the day. He was a guest lecturer, an old-school investor with a sharp eye. I reached out years later. Through a network of shell companies, Charles now owns 19% of Novamed. I hold 17%. That's 36%. Together, still not enough to unseat my father, who clutches over 50% through long-standing shareholders and decades of backroom loyalty. But that never stopped me. For the last 10 years, I've done more than build tech. I've built relationships, quiet dinners, honest conversations. I showed them what Novamed could be, not just profitable, but life-saving. I talked about what our AI had already done, the families saved, the children given second chances. I showed them what Caleb's reckless spending had cost us, and they listened. Because here's the truth. Real power doesn't come from titles or bloodlines. It comes from trust, from results, from showing up every single day and doing the damn work. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever worked in silence while someone else took the spotlight? Have you ever built something behind the scenes, knowing one day the world would finally see it? Comment below. Tell me your story. I'm not done yet, and neither are you. Have you ever stood in a room full of powerful people, knowing the next thing you said might either ruin you or change everything? That's exactly where I was the day I challenged my family. The company was called betrayal. We'd spent 2 decades building it from a garage project into a billion-dollar healthcare tech firm. But behind the polished glass walls and press releases, things were falling apart. And at the center of that slow collapse was my brother, Lucas. I remember saying to one of our earliest investors, Mr. Daniels, an older man with a sharp mind and a sharp tie, what this company needs now isn't loyalty, it needs leadership. He stared at me for a beat. Then he said, "You're right, Ben. Lucas isn't the man for this era, not anymore." That moment stuck with me. I started having quiet conversations. First with junior shareholders who were tired of seeing our innovations crushed under Lucas's vanity projects. Then with the engineers who were working overtime to make real breakthroughs only to see budgets slashed for splashy ad campaigns that failed every time. Every person I spoke to became part of a quiet storm gathering force. Then it happened. 1 week before the annual shareholders meeting, my father, the founder, the legend, dropped the bomb. He was stepping down as CEO, and he planned to hand everything to Lucas. The entire building buzzed with disbelief. Some employees rolled their eyes. Others whispered behind closed doors. But I knew this was the moment we had been waiting for. A few days before the meeting, I sat across from Charlotte, our legal strategist, at a small cafe just off Market Street in San Francisco. I kept my voice low. "Are we ready?" She didn't flinch. "We've secured 36%, she said, sipping her coffee like we were talking about the weather. "And I've confirmed 5 swing votes. If you speak up, they'll follow you." I didn't sleep much that week. The morning of the meeting, I walked into the glass conference room on the 11th floor. It was packed. Investors, lawyers, board members, every seat taken. My father stood in a dark navy suit, commanding the room with a kind of practiced grace. Lucas sat next to him, flipping through his speech, a smirk already on his face. He thought he'd won. I sat quietly in the back. My hands trembled, but my mind was razor sharp. I'd waited a decade for this. Then my father started speaking. "Lucas has shown remarkable leadership," he said. "He will carry Vitellon into its next chapter." A few scattered claps, but not many. Then he said it. "I propose that Lucas be named CEO. I will also begin the process of transferring my controlling shares to him." You could feel the tension snap, like a cable about to break. I stood. "I object." Every head turned. My father froze, his eyes locking on mine. Lucas chuckled, like it was all a joke. But the second I stepped forward, that smile started to slide off his face. I spoke clearly. "Vitellon is bleeding, not because of our ideas, but because of Lucas's decisions. Failed campaigns, reckless contracts, suppliers we couldn't trust. We've lost millions." I opened the folder I had brought with me, 10 years worth of evidence. Internal memos, financial reports, emails Lucas thought no one would ever read again. Page after page, I laid it all out. People gasped, some whispered, others leaned forward. Then I said the thing that brought the room to full silence. Our cancer detection, AI. That's the reason we're still standing. Our engineers gave us gold. Lucas ignored them. I looked directly at the people who held this company's future in their hands. If we let this continue, we're not just risking dollars, we're risking lives. And for the first time, even my father couldn't meet my eyes. What would you do if the very man who taught you everything turned into the reason you nearly lost it all? It happened on a Wednesdays, those ordinary days that seemed to hold the heaviest storms. We were in the glass-walled boardroom at Solus Biogen, the company my mother built from the ground up. The same company my father was now steering toward ruin. I stood there, surrounded by familiar faces that suddenly felt like strangers, each of them shifting uncomfortably in their leather chairs. When I spoke up against my father, he sprang from his seat so fast the chair toppled backward. His face was red, veins tight in his neck. "You dare stand here and challenge me?" His voice shook the room. I could feel the weight in his words, not just rage, but a desperate grip on power. But I didn't back down. "I'm not challenging you," I said, steady as I could. "I'm protecting what Mum started." This company meant everything to her. That name Mum hit like a brick. For just a second, I saw it in his eyes. Grief, or maybe guilt. But I didn't let the silence grow. I leaned forward and said what no one else dared to. "I own 17% of Solus Biogen's shares," I declared, my voice clear. A ripple of gasps broke through the room. "And I've secured the support of Mr. Charles Whitman, who holds 19%, and several other key investors." Charles stood immediately, his calm presence adding gravity. Then Robert, a longtime investor, followed with a quiet nod. Others joined. The mood shifted. Tension climbed like a slow elevator to the top floor. That's when Ryan, my younger brother, and our head of marketing snapped. You can't do this. This company is ours." I didn't even look at him. I turned back to the board and painted a different vision. One of innovation, accountability, and global leadership. In medical tech, I spoke about saving lives, not saving egos. When I finished, I calmly motioned for the board to vote on 2 proposals. The removal of my father as CEO and chairman, and the immediate termination of Ryan's role. No yelling, no threats. Just the weight of truth and consequences. Then came the longest silence of my life. Whispered side conversations, heads bowed over ballots. I stood gripping the polished edge of the conference table, my palms slick, my heart punching my ribs like a drum dot. My eyes drifted around the room, Charles with a steady half smile. Robert nodding in silent approval. Maria in the back, her expression lit with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope, but the hardest person to face was him. My father sat still now, his eyes locked on mine, not blazing with anger, but hollow, shocked. For once in his life, he had nothing to say. That silence. It told me I'd already won. No matter the vote. And then the secretary stepped forward. Effective immediately. She read, her voice even. "Mr. Jonathan Reeves is removed from his position as CEO and chairman of the board. Mr. Ryan Reeves is dismissed as director of marketing. In their place, Mr. Lucas Reeves is appointed CEO and chairman of Solus Biogen." The room erupted. Applause, gasps. A few people even stood. Charles came over and shook my hand. Maria wiped a tear from her cheek. But I didn't celebrate. I looked at my father, the man who ruled with fear my whole life, now rising from his chair with a slow, defeated motion. His face flushed, but not from rage this time, it was from shame. And you know what? I didn't feel joy. Just clarity. If this story made you feel anything, drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have made the same choice? Or walked away instead? Let's talk. Your voice matters more than you think. ChatGPT Noi. What does it really feel like to win against the very people who said you'd never be good enough? Not just prove them wrong, but actually take everything they built and rebuild it better. I thought it would feel like triumph. It didn't when James stormed out of that conference room. I could feel the heat radiating off him, like a furnace about to blow. His hands were shaking, furious, restrained. I knew that look. I'd seen it before, years ago, when it was followed by a slap. But this time, there were no fists, just silence. His eyes burned into mine, rage, and something else I couldn't demand. Then he turned and left. The door slammed behind him like a final judgment. His era at Avalon Biotech was officially over. Dean, his golden boy, his favorite, sat next to him like a stunned deer, frozen under headlights. His skin had gone pale, lips sealed in a thin, bitter line. Those same blue eyes that once made my father choose him over me were now wide with fear. He stood, wobbled slightly, then leaned in close enough for me to catch the venom in his whisper. "You'll regret this." But I didn't answer. I didn't blink. I just watched him trail after James, his posture crumpling like a collapsed tower. When the door clicked shut again, the silence shattered into applause. I barely heard it. Daniel stepped up onto the stage, his hand warm on my shoulder. "You did it, Marcus," he said, and the room followed with handshakes, backpats, and bright promises of the future. I smiled, I nodded, but inside, I felt nothing. That night, I sat alone in the office, my father's old office, now mine. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the glow of Seattle below. The skyline shimmered, glittering like a promise. I leaned back, in the chair he once owned, trying to feel something, anything. Avalon was mine now, not just by title, but by grit, sweat, and years of relentless work. I'd rescued this company from the brink, turned it into a billion-dollar name. The AI diagnostic tools we'd developed were now saving lives in over 20 countries. I'd done what they said I never could. I was no longer the unwanted stepson, no longer the disposable employee, no longer that screw-up. Dean had mocked me. James had humiliated me. I'd proved them both wrong, so why? Did it feel like I lost something I'll never get back? I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out the only thing I'd carried with me from job to job ban. Old cedar box. Inside, folded carefully, were letters. Letters my mother had written to me when I was in college. Her handwriting had faded over the years, but the scent lavender and ink still lingered faintly. I unfolded one and let my eyes move slowly. Across the words, "Always be the man you know you are, even if no one else sees it yet." I read that line 3 times. It hit me harder than Dean's glare. Harder than my father's silence. I had done exactly what she said. I became that man. But now, I was alone at the top of a mountain I spent years climbing. And maybe the applause, the titles, the empire, none of it really mattered without someone who saw me before I became it. Let me ask you something. Have you ever finally gotten the thing you chased for a lifetime, and still felt hollow inside? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know, have you ever won a battle and still felt like you lost something more important? Because I did. And I still don't know how to live with that. Have you ever done everything in your power to honor someone who's no longer here, only to wonder if it's really what they would have wanted? That question hit me harder than I expected the day I stood at the top floor of our new corporate headquarters, surrounded by executives and journalists calling my name. Everyone was clapping, smiling, calling it a triumph. But deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about one voice, hers. My mum's. "You are my hope." I used to think I understood those words, but now, after everything I've built, after everything I've lost, they hit differently. Tears didn't come from sadness, not exactly. It was the ache of wanting to hear her say it again, to feel her hand on my shoulder, to know if she'd be proud of how far I'd come, or, if I'd gone too far. My whole journey, every decision, every late night, every sacrifice was for her. For the love she gave me, for the strength she saw in me, even when I couldn't see it myself. But now that I was finally here, leading the company she once dreamed I'd touch, I couldn't help but wonder, did I honor her, or just chase ghosts? And then there was my father. The last time we spoke, he walked out of a board meeting with nothing left, his authority, his pride, stripped clean. And even after years of his coldness, his judgment, his silence, watching him walk away like that felt like being gutted from the inside out. I didn't hate him. I should have, but I didn't. All I felt was this empty ache where love was. Supposed to be, and Ryan, my brother, the one I once hoped would finally see me, finally get me, had become nothing but a bitter shell. We'd tried, we really did, but some fractures can't be patched. That final confrontation cut through whatever strands of family were left. It was done. I didn't regret what I'd done. I couldn't, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't cost me more than I'd ever imagined. I didn't lose them in one moment. I lost them piece by piece, every time I chose purpose over peace. But, in exchange, I gained clarity. Under my leadership, neurogenic systems didn't just survive, it exploded. I promoted Maria, my fiercest ally, and the one person who never stopped believing in our mission. To Chief Technology Officer, I gave her full reign to launch initiatives that most companies wouldn't touch for another decade. Within a year, we rolled out remote neurological diagnostic tools, 5G-based health data ecosystems, and an AI care assistant that redefined what home health meant. Hospitals across the country were signing contracts faster than we could fill them. Investors from every coast called me a visionary. Our face was on the front of Forbes. Wall Street dubbed me the one who resurrected American biotech. But I kept my head down. I worked. I learned. I remembered my mother's lessons. Integrity is quiet. Resilience is stubborn. I never moved out of the tiny apartment in Lincoln Park. I could have bought a penthouse on the lake, but I didn't. I couldn't. That apartment was where I had failed, learned, bled. Where I'd stood barefoot in the kitchen, reading Mum's last letter, every night. I came home, sat by that same window, and stared out at the skyline, this glittering machine of dreams and lies. And I'd remember all the nights I almost quit. All the times I walked alone through the freezing dark, wondering if I was chasing something that didn't exist. And then, I'd open that wooden box. Her handwriting still smelled faintly like lavender. I'd run my fingers across her words like they were braille etched on my soul. And I'd whisper, "I did it, Mum. I hope you'd be proud." But would she be? That question still clings to me some nights. Because while I might have saved the company, I couldn't save my family. My father might never speak to me again. Ryan might carry that resentment forever. And I've accepted that. But the ache lingers. I know the road ahead won't be easy. Competitors will try to tear us down. Critics will question every decision I make. And some days, the loneliness will be louder than the applause. But I'm not afraid anymore, because what I've learned, the real lesson is that strength doesn't come from winning. It comes from surviving. From getting up, again and again. Even when the people you love stop clapping for you. So if you've ever questioned your path, if you've ever given everything for someone who can't see it anymore, tell me, what keeps you going? Drop a comment below, I'd really like to hear it. As for me, I'll keep going. With her letters in my hand, and her voice in my heart. Because no matter how far I go, I know I'm not walking alone.